40 years before Salahuddin's birth, a massacre scarred the Islamic world. When European Crusaders breached the walls of Jerusalem, they slaughtered the city's Muslim population. Looking at this map, you can see how the invading forces entrenched their power. They carved 4 heavily fortified Christian states right into the divided center of the region: the kingdoms of Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, and Edessa. On the exact night Salahuddin was born in the city of Tikrit, his family was abruptly ordered into exile. They were pushed out onto the streets as refugees, eventually making their way to Damascus. Growing up in the ancient streets of Damascus, the young boy showed zero interest in warfare. He preferred books over swords, dedicating his youth to the quiet study of literature, the Quran, and the sayings of the Prophet. But the 12th century was relentlessly volatile. The geopolitical pressures surrounding him meant a life of peaceful academia was impossible. The scholar would soon be pulled out of the mosque and thrown directly onto the battlefield. The crisis centered on Egypt. Looking out over Cairo, the Fatimid Caliphate was collapsing. Power was hoarded by corrupt ministers who fought each other while Crusader armies prepared to invade and take the territory for themselves. Recognizing that if Egypt fell, Syria and Palestine would be entirely surrounded, the Muslim ruler Nur-ad-Din Zangi made a preemptive move. He dispatched his best general, Shirkuh, and Shirkuh forcibly dragged his reluctant, book-loving nephew along for the campaign. That nephew was Salahuddin. Over the next half-decade, he was plunged into a grinding 5-year war, fighting a 2-front conflict against Fatimid and Crusader forces. When Shirkuh unexpectedly died in 1169, the Fatimid leadership saw an opportunity. They appointed the 31-year-old Salahuddin to the highest ministerial rank of wazir, calculating that this young, untested academic would be easy to control. It was a catastrophic political misjudgment. The intense, multi-sided warfare in Egypt had already stripped away his hesitations, forging a brilliant tactician who was quietly moving his own loyalists into positions of absolute power. By September 1171, Salahuddin made his move. During Friday prayers at Cairo's central mosque, the Khatib simply swapped the name of the Fatimid Caliph for the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. No swords were drawn. A centuries-old empire was dissolved with a single sentence. But 3 years later, Nur-ad-Din Zangi died, leaving behind a young heir. Almost immediately, the political cohesion of the region shattered. Local warlords carved out their own fiefdoms, and the Muslim world fractured once again. Salahuddin recognized a harsh reality. Taking back the Holy Land was militarily impossible, so long as his own neighbors were fighting each other. He spent the next 12 agonizing years turning his armies against rival Muslim factions, trying to stitch Egypt and Syria under one banner. He had to besiege the massive stone fortifications of his own people, like at Aleppo. This internal conflict made him fiercely hated among rival leaders, putting a target on his back. He drew multiple assassination attempts from the secretive and deadly Hashashim organization. He absorbed these attacks because unifying the factions was a tactical necessity. Without a massive, consolidated army, surviving Europe's encroaching military power was impossible. The United Front was tested in 1187. Crusader chieftain Reynold repeatedly broke regional peace treaties. He crossed a final line when he attacked a massive caravan of unarmed pilgrims heading for the Hajj, slaughtering them and stealing their wealth. Salahuddin mobilized for war, but he refused to attack the heavily fortified Crusader strongholds directly, knowing it would be a costly mistake. Instead, he laid siege to the coastal city of Tiberias, knowing enemy commanders wouldn't ignore it. They ordered their heavily armored knights to march out and meet him. This map shows his trap. As Crusaders advanced across the desert, Salahuddin's cavalry seized the local wells, cutting off their water. Exhausted and dehydrated, the army collapsed inward. On July 4, 1187, at Hattin, their largest force was completely wiped out. In the aftermath, the captured king of Jerusalem was brought to Salahuddin's tent. The Sultan offered him a cup of iced water, but when the king tried to pass the cup to Reynold, Salahuddin stopped him. In Arab custom, sharing water guarantees a prisoner's life. Reynold was granted no such mercy. Fulfilling a sworn earlier oath to protect his people, Salahuddin executed the ruthless chieftain himself. Hattin was won before swords even clashed. Salahuddin weaponized the desert environment itself, utilizing strict discipline and geographical control to break an impenetrable enemy. With the primary Crusader army destroyed, the path to Jerusalem was open. After a brief 2-week siege, the Holy City formally surrendered on October 2nd, coinciding with the Islamic Holy Night of Shab-e-Miraj. Remembering the rivers of blood from 1099, the city's Christians braced for a retaliatory massacre. Instead, Salahuddin declared a strict general amnesty. Not a single church was touched, and no civilian blood was shed. He allowed residents to leave for a small fixed ransom. But when thousands of poor citizens remained who couldn't afford the fee, Salahuddin and his brother stepped in, paying the ransom for them out of their own private funds so they could leave safely. Entering the city on a Friday without the usual pomp of a conqueror, he immediately ordered the mosque's structure to be washed with rosewater. He then installed a beautiful wooden mimbar, a pulpit, that his former master Nuruddin Zangi had built years earlier for this exact moment. By protecting the vulnerable instead of slaughtering them, he permanently shattered the cycle of retaliatory violence. The true weight of this victory came entirely from his personal character. The loss of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through Europe, triggering the Third Crusade. This time, a massive coalition army arrived, commanded by European heavyweight monarchs like Richard the Lionheart. Despite years of intense, grinding warfare, the European kings could not dislodge Salahuddin. Exhausted, both sides eventually agreed to the Treaty of Jaffa. Jerusalem remained firmly under Muslim control, while unarmed Christian pilgrims were guaranteed safe passage to visit their holy sites. The scholar, forced into decades of continuous war, rarely saw times of peace. Just months after the treaty was signed in 1193, Salahuddin fell ill and passed away. He was only 56 years old. When his advisors opened his personal treasury, they found an astonishing reality. The supreme ruler of an empire stretching from Egypt to Syria had given away almost everything he owned. He left behind a single gold coin and 47 silver dirhams. There wasn't even enough money to pay for his own burial shroud. He spent a lifetime holding a massive, fractured civilization together with sheer strategic will. Yet his endurance in history comes down to the restraint he showed when he finally held absolute power, choosing to build an empire on mercy rather than revenge.